Hi, and welcome to our PREZI for the 2018 Who Pays What report. This short presentation is an overview of the top findings from our most recent research on beverage container collection and recycling in Canada. Before we get into that, let me tell you about the report. Who Pays What is produced by CM Consulting, an environmental consulting firm specializing in waste minimization and public policy. First released in 2002, the Who Pays What report features the most up-to-date data on beverage container recovery in Canada. Updated on a biannual basis, it is considered to be an invaluable tool and reference guide for government agencies as well as professionals in the beverage industry and recycling sector. This 9th edition of Who Pays What includes new and revised content on cost and collection data, an analysis of the economic benefits of deposit return for municipalities, and more. Unfortunately, for this edition of the report, some of the primary data to measure program performance in the provinces of Quebec and Manitoba was unavailable and unverifiable. For this reason, this report does not publish results from either province's curbside collection systems. To download the full report or view individual sections, go to cmconsultinginc.com. Before we get into the results of our research, I'd like to discuss program performance measurement. Sports teams track scores and performance statistics to make the changes they need to improve. Companies monitor their expenses and revenues and levels of customer satisfaction in order to remain profitable. It is the same thing for recycling programs. Without performance measurement, it's difficult, if not impossible, to design effective programs and to ensure that they are meeting their objectives. Program performance is typically measured using the collection rate, which represents the number of containers collected for recycling in a given jurisdiction versus the number of containers sold. Measuring the performance of a deposit return system, or DRS, is simple. All sales and refunds are reported to the last unit. Measuring the performance of multi-material collection systems, such as those in Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, for non-alcohol beverages, on the other hand, is more complex. The complexity here lies in that beverage containers are collected, commingled with other types of containers, for example, PET from non-beverage sources, like PET thermoform, the containers used to package fruits and baked goods, along with other waste and non-targeted recyclables that get collected with recyclables. Adding to this complexity is the fact that the weight of contamination, leftover fluid, non-recyclables, glue, caps, is also included in the weight of collected containers. This renders the collection rate unable to reflect actual recycling of beverage containers. Because we can know what is truly recycled in these programs, the weight of non-beverage container material must be subtracted from the total collection tonnage. For this reason, this report provides recycling rates. All beverage containers shipped for recycling will experience some degree of yield loss due to the caps, the labels, and the glue that remain on the bottles after sorting. And it's important that both the numerator, the amount of beverages collected, and the denominator, those sold, include or exclude the weight of this material in a consistent manner. Even in deposit return programs, a certain level of yield loss will occur as a result of the recycling process. PET bottles, for example, can lose up to 15% by weight of their material in a system. Some of these losses are fines, which can be sold as a byproduct, but most are disposed of in landfill or sent to an incinerator. As program operators seek new ways to increase the recovery of beverage containers, it's important that they start reporting what is actually recycled, the recycling rate, not just what is collected for recycling. The PER is the amount of beverage container material received by a recycler that is used in a recycling process, excluding energy from waste and landfill, expressed as a percentage of the amount of material shipped to the recycler. The higher the PER, the lower the level of contamination, and vice versa. It should be noted that this procedure is required only for collection rates that are measured and reported in weight, as it is in Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec for non-carbonated beverages. The collection rate reported for deposit return programs are not affected by processing losses and efficiencies because these rates are based on unit counts, not on weight. On the other hand, recycling rates reported for non-deposit multi-material collection programs decrease as the level of contamination increases. Here you can see what the average loss rates are in jurisdictions where beverage containers are commingled with other recyclables. The loss rates are reported by the very industries that manage the collected materials and are current. Here are some of our key findings. Let's start with the refillable bottle. Canada's collection rate for these containers has been consistently high. In 2016, 95% of all refillable beer containers sold were collected for reuse or recycling. For non-refillable containers, most provinces are recycling one-way beverage containers at a rate of 80% or higher. These provinces have deposit return programs and are able to achieve higher collection rates than provinces with only curbside recycling and or away from home collection. This is a direct result of the economic incentive that the refundable deposit gives for returning the empty container. The next 3 slides will present recycling rates by material for each province. Nationally, 71% of aluminum cans are recycled. With the exception of Newfoundland and Quebec, all of the deposit return programs for cans are achieving 79% or higher. In Quebec, where the can rate is significantly below most of the other deposit jurisdictions, the deposit on beer cans is only 5 cents, while most programs have a 10-cent refund on beer cans. The national average is brought down significantly by the low performance of Ontario's non-alcohol program, where cans are collected via a combination of curbside and away-from-home recycling. PET bottles are recycled at a rate of 59% across the country. Like other container types, the national rate is brought down by the poor performance of Ontario's curbside program. The national recycling rate for non-refillable glass bottles is 68%, but this does not include glass collected via the curbside programs in Ontario or Quebec because it's impossible to determine the recycling rate for non-alcoholic glass in these provinces. We also do not include Manitoba glass in this figure because none of it is recycled. Instead, it is going into sandblasting and road fill applications, which we call recovery, and it does not qualify as recycling. This slide shows combined all material recycling rates for non-refillable beverage containers in all provinces. We can see that Ontario, with no deposit program, lags significantly behind all of the other deposit programs in the country. Verifiable performance data for Quebec and Manitoba's curbside programs was not available and so are not included in this report. Away from home recycling. Today's beverage market is packed with convenient items, grab-and-go packages in single-use containers that weren't around when curbside recycling programs were first conceived in the late 1980s. As more of these items enter the marketplace, the number of containers consumed away from home at places like sports stadiums, concerts, universities, and gas stations is on the rise. While the majority of beverages continue to be consumed in households, it's estimated that anywhere between 30 to 40% of beverages are consumed from home, in areas where recycling services may not be available. Knowing the number of beverage containers that are consumed and discarded away from home is critical to determine an accurate recycling rate and design an effective recycling program. Despite this importance, there is very little data on this subject because there's very little information from the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector. In an effort to encourage the recycling of beverage containers consumed away from home, industry organizations have in some Canadian cities and provinces implemented pilots and long-term programs. In Manitoba, the Canadian Beverage Container Recycling Association, a not-for-profit, industry-funded organization whose members include beverage brand owners and distributors, introduced Recycle Everywhere. Recycle Everywhere was Canada's first province-wide, away-from-home beverage container recycling program. The program provides recycling bins free of charge to communities, schools, businesses, provincial parks, community centers, and events around the province to allow Manitobans to conveniently recycle their beverage containers rather than throwing them in the garbage. Public space recycling programs, or pilots, have also been implemented in Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Alberta. While it is clear from the various pilot programs that recycling of beverage containers in away-from-home locations is enhanced by the addition of bins and signage, it's also important to point out the difference in the findings between Richmond, BC, a city where all beverage containers bear a deposit, and Sarnia and Niagara, Ontario, where most beverage containers are collected at curbside. In Sarnia and Niagara, audits revealed that recyclable beverage containers made up approximately 16% by weight of the materials deposited in the recycling and waste bins combined. These numbers are significantly higher than those reported in Richmond, BC, where recyclable beverage containers were found to make up only 1.8% of the waste stream. When viewed in terms of volume, the results are even more striking. In Sarnia and Niagara, beverage containers make up 34 and 38% respectively of the away-from-home combined waste and recycling streams by volume, whereas in Richmond, they make up only 3%. This data demonstrates that where deposit programs exist, beverage containers make up a much smaller portion of the away-from-home waste and recycling stream, the costs for which are usually borne by municipalities. System financing. Revenues for deposit return systems in Canada come from unredeemed deposits, revenues from the material sale, and consumer or producer fees. Revenue for collecting beverage containers via curbside collection come from stewardship fees and municipal budgets. Intended to act as an incentive to recycle, deposits are charged on containers when they are purchased and refunded when the consumer returns the container to an authorized redemption center or retailer. When a consumer does not return the container, the system keeps the deposit to offset system costs. Here we see how the deposit in Alberta is higher than in BC. Alberta raised their deposit and refund in 2009 because rates had been stuck at 75% from 2004 to 2008. The effect of the increase was that the rate rose to 82% in 2010 and has further risen to 86% for all non-refillable containers by 2016. In Canada's North and the Atlantic provinces, only a portion of the deposit is refunded when a non-refillable container is returned. The portion of the deposit not returned, in addition to any unredeemed deposits, is used to help offset and fund the system costs and subsidize other provincial environmental initiatives. Revenues from material sales play an important role in helping to offset the gross costs of the program. This revenue will vary depending on the current market of materials collected, as well as on the types of collected materials and their respective collection rates. In British Columbia and Alberta, where the deposit return system covers all material types collected, excluding those for domestic beer, the program revenues generated by material sales paid for 12% and 23% of the total program costs, respectively. In most deposit return programs around the world, the bulk of the system costs are paid for by the beverage industry. In Canada, however, programs have been designed in a way to minimize or eliminate the industry's financial obligation by passing it on directly to consumers in the form of a front-end or a back-end fee. There are 4 types of fees being charged to consumers to finance the collection and recycling of beverage containers in Canada. They are container recycling fees, or CRF, in a deposit system, environmental handling charges, a container recycling fee paid as a levy, and a halfback on deposits. As of July 2016, 5 out of 10 provinces have legislation in place requiring that industry share the cost of recycling their waste, packaging, and printed paper with municipalities. Only in Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec does this apply to beverage containers. This table shows the legal obligation for producers in terms of their share of the net cost to be paid into the program. In each province, the responsible agency collects fees from the stewards based on the amount of packaging their products contribute to the province's waste and recycling stream. Specific packaging or stewardship fees vary from one province to another and also by material type. In a deposit return system, expenses or costs incurred to run the system are from collection, transportation, processing, and administration. Most of the program operators issue publicly available annual reports that detail these line items. Many factors can affect program costs, including the collection rate, number of depots, economies of scale, and population density. This is why costs of provincial programs should not directly be compared with each other, as each program may have different operating parameters. Container handling fees are per-unit fees paid to redemption centers or depots or retailers as compensation for receiving, collecting, paying out refunds, sorting, and storing returned beverage containers. These fees can vary by container type and depot agreement. In Alberta, for example, in 2016, the range was a low of 3.24 cents for aluminum cans to a high of 23.83 cents for a bag-in-the-box container over a liter. These fee rates are based on different costs of handling and storage associated with different types of beverage containers. In some provinces, such as Newfoundland, all beverage containers except for beer are charged a uniform handling fee. One of the key goals of this study is to identify the share or percentage of program costs that each stakeholder group is responsible for, hence the name, Who Pays What. By identifying how system costs are shared among the different players in each province, we gain insight into the equity or fairness of the funding models used in each program. The share is calculated by taking the stakeholders' contribution and dividing it by the total amount of program funding, excluding material revenues, as expressed here. There are 5 major stakeholder groups that pay into the system: the wasting consumer, the recycling consumer, the provincial government, or Liquor Commission in Ontario's case, the municipal government, in the case of Ontario and Manitoba, and the beverage industry. Our Who Bears the Share analysis confirms that only in 2 provinces, Quebec and Ontario, does the beverage industry pay for some portion of the cost for collection and recycling of beverage containers in the municipal recycling system. Here, the industry pays for some costs of curbside collection because they are mandated through provincial extended producer responsibility laws. In most provinces, some or all of the system costs are borne by the consumer. There are 2 types of consumers: the wasting consumer and the recycling consumer. The wasting consumer is that consumer who chooses not to redeem their container for refund. The percentage of the program costs borne by the wasting consumer varies by province and depends on a number of factors, including the deposit value and whether beverage containers are subject to any upfront, non-refundable fees. The recycling consumer is the consumer who returns the empty containers for a refund or places them into a designated recycling bin where there are no deposits. This table shows the average cost per unit paid by the recycling and the wasting consumers. Let's look at some of the environmental benefits that come from recycling beverage containers in Canada. In 2016, Canadians recycled or reused over 12 billion beverage containers, avoiding the release of over 1 million tons of greenhouse gases. This is equivalent to taking over 245,000 cars off the road. Besides the obvious environmental benefits, the reuse and recycling of beverage containers has significant economic benefits as well. Although sometimes difficult to quantify, these costs and benefits must be considered if we are to understand the full picture of beverage container recycling costs in Canada. In addition to job creation and economic growth, deposit return programs are good for municipal budgets. While deposit return may divert potential sources of revenue from curbside programs, they also result in a significant net cost savings. These savings come from the reduced or avoided costs of collection, treatment, and disposal by the municipal waste management system. Savings also come from reduced litter cleanup costs, which can be significant. The costs of removing litter from roadways, public parks, and commercial establishments are borne not only by municipalities, but also by provincial governments, educational institutions, and private businesses. We wanted to get a better understanding of the economic effects of deposit return systems on the budgets of municipalities. To do this, we researched every study performed on the subject since the year 2000. This table presents the compilation of 27 studies that examined the quantifiable costs and benefits to municipalities of implementing or expanding a deposit system for beverage containers. It's noteworthy that, although different in scope, location, author, and year, each study reported significant cost savings to municipalities. CM Consulting would like to give a special note of thanks to our financial supporters of this report. The Who Pays What report is a jointly sponsored initiative paid for by industry, not-for-profit agencies, and governments. This cost-share model provides interested parties with a valuable report at an extremely affordable cost. To view previous versions of the report as well as the current edition, please visit our website at cmconsultinginc.com. And for questions or comments, please contact Jason Wilcox at jason@cmconsultinginc.com.